Before the Hungarian election, I was worried because their electoral system is kind of disproportional, meaning overrepresenting big parties. But guess what? Viktor Orbán lost so bad that his party actually became the victim of that system. They won about 38% of the votes, but only 28% of the seats. That's so sweet. In the last few elections, he always won way more seats compared to the vote percentage. But this time, the fortune reversed because his party is now reduced to a small party while the opposition forces consolidated into one big party. For the record, their electoral system is actually not nearly as bad as the US system. But it's worse than before due to a backward reform in 2011. They reduced the size of the parliament and also reduced the percentage of seats that are elected proportionally. So both measures made smaller parties harder to gain seats. Apparently, the Orbán government passed that reform to give his party more seats so he could play with the constitution and pass whatever laws without resistance. But now it's the other party's turn to have a 2/3 supermajority. They can easily undo every stupid Russia-coded policy and even reform the institutions. I don't know much about this new guy, but this alone is a big green flag. He's willing to set a term limit on himself. And it's probably gonna pass given his party's seat share. In my view, there's no better quality of a political leader than knowing when to step down, when no one is forcing them. Actually, the only reason electoral politics became a global norm was that George Washington somehow decided not to run for a third term. All those Federalist Papers, all the revolutions and institutional innovations would have been for nothing if Washington hadn't made that fateful decision. Of course, some people are like, see, Orbán was not a dictator. He conceded right away. Well, that depends on how you define a dictator. If you define a dictator as someone who can do whatever they want, then no, Orbán was not a dictator. He was constrained by the institutions Hungary installed in order to stay in the EU. He was able to manipulate the rules to a certain extent, but he couldn't just close the internet or push people out of the windows. But if you define a dictator as someone who actually tried to get rid of all the constraints and do whatever they want, then he is definitely a dictator at heart. He used the state-owned TV to blast his own campaign ads. He used the EU funding to reward his own cronies, and he cozied up with Putin to normalize dictatorship globally. But he couldn't go any further. He certainly doesn't want to step down, but there's nothing he can do to stay. If he dared to pull something like a January 6th, I can tell you the angry Hungarians would eat him alive. By the way, I saw this interesting article by Mitch McConnell, of all people. Normally I'm the last person to quote the old turtle, but this time he actually said something useful, sort of. He said, Orbán's champions on this side of the Atlantic may well consider his illiberal court-packing, crony capitalism, or restriction of free speech an acceptable price for their desired social utopia. Yet, for all the talk of reviving faith and family through statist intervention, Hungary's religious participation and birth rates under his rule have declined right alongside the rest of the West. I actually said something like that in a video before. My answer to his puzzle is that the American MAGA didn't support Orbán for his cultural policy in the first place. Why would J.D. Vance care about the LGBT in Hungary? No way. For Trump's inner circle, authoritarianism is not a side effect of family values. Authoritarianism is the goal itself. Being able to rule forever is the point. Conservative value is just a means to that end. How to deal with these mofos? Well, vote at a number as convincing as the Hungarians and make that taco guy never dare to try another January 6th.